I see this parallelism between your own experience and Charles Jacobs, this Jewish activist as well. Both of you deeply interested in kind of two parallel tracks. One is, of course, Israel and the plight of the Jews and Israeli society, and also, in Charles Jacobs' case, Sudan, and the plight of African people there on the part of the persecution that they're experiencing and the enslavement of the Muslims there. And so, both of you here, in your case, in the Congo, but this, there seems to be this hunger for justice, whether it's in Africa, whether it's in Israel, and there are elements of your own faith as well and your own personal experience. All of these things kind of running in parallel tracks.
I think for me, I guess the thing that I've struggled with is a relationship between the ideas in our head and the oppression that we inflict on other people. And it's taken me a long time to somehow be able to separate the ideas in somebody's head and the ideas in my own head and the humanity of the person standing in front of me. And this is a very difficult thing, is how do you deal with people as human beings despite all of the symbols that fly around in our head. Earlier you talked about how the Palestinian identity is basically kind of up for grabs, and it's not, we don't really know sometimes what it stands for. Imagine what it's like to be a Palestinian and have to live under the burden of that identity and not really want to hurt anybody, but think, but to know that the Palestinian identity is, in many respects, arouses enormous suspicion on the part of huge numbers of people. And the problem is that, how do you say, well, you need to fight over what what the Palestinian people actually stand for? Do you want a future for yourselves, or do you want to deny, the Jewish people their future? And what type of signal do you get off or give off? And a while back I read a book called How God Changes Your Mind, which basically talked about how religious practice essentially moves us from our limbic brain into our frontal cortex, and it basically allows us to feel empathy for people. And that was really, what happened is that at a certain point I kind of broke, and the polemical and ideological person that I was just couldn't go the way he had been going any further.
And when was that?
I would say about the end of 2007. And at a certain point, and it was at a point where I was it should have been the most successful moment of my life. I finally got an article published in the Boston Globe about a group called Zile Ecumenical Liberation Theology Center. It was I detailed some of the problems that Zile has. It's used anti-Jewish polemic from the New Testament to assail Israel, and it makes Israelis really unhappy and angry when they see this type of language used. And when this article got published, it was like, on one hand, it was like an outward manifestation of success, but afterwards, it was like I was broken. I came to the end of the road as far as I was going to get with that type of response. And eventually, I ended up going to a monastery out in central Massachusetts, a Trappist monastery, and basically it kind of fell apart. And eventually I became a Roman Catholic, as a result of that. And I don't remember when the monastery trip, but it was all kind of a jumble. And one of the things that I did was I did what they call a 19th annotation, these spiritual exercises that even Tony Campolo mentioned them at the Christ at the Checkpoint conference. And he gave off an aura of somebody that's actually used the Bible to interrogate his very soul. And I knew at that point that, when I started to use the New Testament in particular, and what type of person do I want to be? Previously, Jesus had largely been an indictment of the person I was, okay? I was a low-status male, okay, who wanted more and more and more, and I was always grabbing, okay? And, somebody said, well, and if somebody had told me, well, you need to be more like Jesus and be forgiven, I would have said, look, I haven't gotten mine yet. and I want mine. And when I do, well, then maybe I'll think about being like that guy up on the cross, but not until I get mine. And what happened was that I kind of got mine and I was broken. And so I realized that Jesus didn't have to be just an indictment to me anymore, but that he could actually be an example that I could follow. And one of the things that he did, and this has been a long process, and I'm not really that good at it because I'm still fundamentally a very polemical, ideological guy who can write pretty well.
Well, you have to be to a certain point passionate. I mean,
right.
The question is, how can we be passionate and at the same time get out of our own skin and see the other perspective, and see the complexity?
Right.
But you should not lose that passion,
right?
Because then it
and that's the thing. And
how can we remain
and
on the edge?
And the thing is that ultimately that was the thing is that when I was at the checkpoint, that was basically, I didn't know it, but it was a culmination of a process that had been going through largely, that started because of going through the spiritual exercises as laid down by, Saint Ignatius. And the thing is that for me, look, I grew up in an anti-Catholic Protestant family, okay? And we made fun of the Catholics. We weren't perfect because that was how we set ourselves up. And the thing is that now here I am, a Roman Catholic, and some of the people that I vibe the best with are evangelicals. And it's a very, very strange world that I live in, okay? Yeah. But that's what happened. And so one of the things that I end up doing is that I end up as a Roman Catholic, I speak in front of, a lot of the times in front of audiences of evangelicals. And I say, I need you to pay attention to the safety of Orthodox Christians in the Middle East. So here it is, I'm a former, liberal Protestant who's now a Roman Catholic speaking to evangelical Protestants about the status of Orthodox Christians in the Middle East. And I kind of joke and I say the Holy Spirit's doing a real bank shot here.
Yeah, well, let me just comment about that. I think your own personal drama, and thank you so much for sharing it, your journey, your personal journey, human journey, is not unrelated to some of the issues that we began speaking about and that we are talking about. On the contrary, I think when I spoke with Charles Jacobs as well, I was struck by some of the comments that he made himself regarding, for example, his own, and I heard him say, I hope I'm quoting him correctly, that he hopes that Christianity grows and continues to be vital and strong, because in that strength lies some of the greatest hope for Israel. And that's kind of a shocking statement coming from an Orthodox Jew. But the fact that you have gone through this journey, I think you stand here to me as a violation of every stereotype that has sometimes been struck regarding people who do what you do. I think on the part of much of liberalism in America and in Europe right now, people who defend Israel or people who defend, let's say, the conservative causes are sometimes painted as simplistic, ignorant, uninterested in issues of justice and human rights, interested in just the white narrative and so on and so forth. And people like you, Charles Jacobs, and others that I have met represent a different kind of conservative, if I may use that word for a moment. Yeah. I know it's a simplification, activist. Which is, these are people who have done many, many things. I mean, they've gone to Africa. They've been in the Peace Corps. They love justice. They understand the issue of race in America and all over the world. They understand the complexities of Christianity and its many flaws and historical mistakes. And so, despite all of that, they have come up with a synthesis that still stands on the conservative side in many ways. And it may not even be conservative. It's simply a much more complex understanding of the human reality. And I think that's important. I think that in a time where everything's becoming so polarized, we need people who stay in the agony of the complexity. They're passionate and yet they're also objective. Mm-hmm. They see issues clearly, but they also see the human dimension, and they stay within that agony, that conflict, and they try to wrestle with it. To me, that's encouraging, because I think what I see more and more is people who are just standing at the issues of simplicity. They have abandoned the tension of living there.
Right.
And, they have had either a very narrow journey in their life that has taken them through the checkpoints of liberalism or the checkpoints of conservatism.
Yeah.
And they simply speak to the choir and stay within themselves. I think we need to cross over. And yet at the same time remain true to our own values.
Right.
And I think people like you, to me, it gives me hope that we need to be that prophetic voice, speaking truth out of our own condition and remaining passionate about what we believe, at the same time trying to be fair. I think that's a wonderful thing. Let me just finish because we're going here. But, we could go on. And
Right.
just that this issue of anti-Semitism in Israel and its plight and the Palestinians and their own plight is so fascinating that, we could remain there forever and ever. But there's another side before we abandon that I want to point out, which is that, we have spoken about the main line being anti-Israel many times and persecuting Israel. And, the Presbyterian Church with divestment initiatives, the Methodists, and so on and so forth. But what gives me most reason for concern is the crumbling support that I see within evangelicals themselves now. It's not just the main lines, the sort of the liberals, quote unquote, Christians who are attacking Israel, but I think also within evangelicalism, those Christians who identify with the traditional viewpoints, the orthodox viewpoints of Christianity, whom I see more and more abandoning Israel and falling into kind of implicit, perhaps more nuanced attack, but attack nevertheless of Israel and its stand vis-a-vis the Palestinians. Because I think the Christ at the checkpoint, I suspect, it wasn't necessarily just liberals. It was also a lot of very evangelical, well-intended. You mentioned this
right.
Wheaton College professor, for example, speaking in very simplistic terms about Orthodox people and so on and so forth. And that gives me a lot of concern because I think traditionally these have been the people who have stood with Israel. And now I think they're falling prey, very subtly, very gradually, incrementally, into the same kind of anti-Israel narrative of Israel the oppressor, Palestinians the victim. And I think that needs to also be addressed.